Hi, and welcome to the Fancy Comma YouTube. Today I'm joined by Rebecca Lindsey. She's a science writer and editor from Southern West Virginia. She has a biochemistry degree from Virginia Tech and a master's degree in journalism and technical communication from Colorado State University. For most of her 25-year career, she has been a federal contractor supporting education and outreach for earth science and climate missions at NASA and NOAA. For the past decade, she was the managing editor of NOAA's Webby Award-winning Climate.gov website, and in late 2023, she became a federal employee as the project's program manager. She was fired in February 2025, along with hundreds of other NOAA probationary employees. Since then, she's been spearheading an effort to launch Climate.us, a nonprofit successor to Climate.gov. Welcome, Rebecca. Tell us about your career path.
Thanks for having me. My career path, when I first went away to college, I was interested in anatomy and physiology and biochemistry and molecular biology. I didn't really think about earth science or climate as being something that I was interested in. And I got a degree from Virginia Tech in biochemistry. And then I went out and after I graduated, started interviewing for jobs in labs and that sort of thing, and realized that's not where I should be. And one interesting thing was that I found that every lab that I ever worked in, every lab, or when I was a lab assistant or any of that sort of thing, I always ended up being the person that got tapped to do the writing and the documentation for the project. And it sort of signaled to me that maybe my passion and my interest was in science communication instead of maybe working in a lab. So I went back to school and got a master's degree in journalism and technical communication at Colorado State. And the first job that I got out of graduate school was working as a technical writer at a federal contractor, and I was based at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland. I was mostly a technical writer. My primary responsibilities were going to scientific meetings and engineering meetings and taking minutes, taking notes, and writing meeting summaries. And I learned so much about remote sensing. I probably could have gotten an honorary degree, but as I worked there and did that job, I began to be involved in outreach and communications. There was a fledgling effort that had just been started there called NASA's Earth Observatory website. And I was offered a job with that team. And so I worked there as a writer and an editor for NASA's Earth Observatory website for about a decade. And then I left to take the job at NOAA, helping build Climate.gov.
I should just say, I love NASA. That would be my dream job, to work as a writer at NASA. But then you went to NOAA and worked on Climate.gov. And then in February, which was actually quite early on in the reductions in force and mass firings, I'm not sure if it was a formal reduction in force back then. Tell us about your journey to becoming a fired Fed in February 2025, and what was that like to experience?
Well, we all knew from the time of the election, we suspected that we were going to have a very hard time in the coming administration. There were news reports already about Project 2025, the strategy that the administration intended to use by targeting feds, probationary feds. So we sort of saw the writing on the wall, and we knew that myself and a couple of other people on our team who were relatively new federal employees were at risk. In probably late January, my boss informed me that the new administration, the new political appointees at NOAA, had requested a list of everybody who was a probationary hire, who still was in their probationary period. Nothing happened for several weeks. My boss said that he had done everything that he could to say how valuable I was, how important what we were doing was, how well I had performed, that I was an employee that he, wanted to retain, but it didn't seem to make any difference. And then one afternoon, I think it was a Thursday, at about 3:45, we got a mass email that said, "You'll be fired effective 5 o'clock today." So we had literally like an hour and change notice that we were losing our jobs. And it wasn't a surprise. Obviously, we knew, but it was still a blow. We hoped, myself and others, we hoped that there would be appeals with the boards that are supposed to regulate how feds are hired and fired. And so, I went through the process of making my appeals, but they were all denied. At present, there are still cases going through the courts that have to do with how the probationary employees were treated, how they were fired, whether it was legal. They haven't been decided yet, so we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, the biggest irony for me would be those court cases come out saying, yeah, it was illegal to fire the probationary employees that way. You're gonna have to offer them all their jobs back, and then I'll have to decide. Gosh, then what would I do? I've already.
Would you go back and work for them? Would you go back and work for the Trump administration after being fired?
I don't think that I could. No. I mean, if our team had not been also cut, and I knew I was going back to a team and a website that still was being allowed to carry out its mission, then yeah, I could have gone back. I would have just said, okay, these politicians thought they could do this thing. The court said, no, you can't do that thing. So now I'm going to go back. I would have considered it if the rest of the team had not also been cut. But even if I were offered my job back now, there'd be no point in it because the team is gone and we wouldn't be allowed to continue our mission. They've made that clear.
So you were fired in February 2025. Climate.gov was taken down as a result of Executive Order 14,303, Restoring Gold Standard Science, which was in May 2025. And I'm just going to read a couple of sentences from it in case people don't know what this executive order says. Obviously came directly from the Trump administration executive branch. It says, over the last 5 years, confidence that scientists act in the best interest of the public has fallen significantly. Unfortunately, the federal government has contributed to this loss of trust. Then it goes on and on. It says, my administration is committed to restoring a gold standard for science to ensure that federally funded research is transparent, rigorous, and impactful, and that federal decisions are informed by the most credible, reliable, and impartial scientific evidence available. Can you explain to everyone watching this what happened between your firing in February 2025 and the takedown of Climate.gov in May, and then kind of the chronology of Climate.us?
Sure. I was fired, obviously, in February, but the rest of the team was still there. And my boss, totally capable of doing my job. He's a great writer and editor. And so the team was able to continue producing stories and maps and data visualizations and, answering questions from the public and all those things that our mission had us doing. They were able to continue that through March and April. But then in May, we learned that all of the contractors that also supported Climate.gov were being laid off. Their positions were being removed from a contract that was going to be renewed, but just not with those positions on it. And even then, we didn't know, obviously, about the administration's plans to try to hide Climate.gov from the public by redirecting our homepage to the NOAA.gov website. It was quite a slap in the face to see the redirect, to know that they had redirected our homepage to NOAA.gov, and justified it by using that executive order and saying, somehow implying that Climate.gov and the content that you could find there was not gold standard science, that our work had to be hidden from the public because it was not based on the best available science. That was a huge, it really made us all very angry. We just, we were really angry. It's one thing if they want to say, this is not our priority, we're going to shut this project down, this isn't our priority. I might, and others might say, well, that's, ridiculous and pointless. And, 15 million people a year visit this site, so it's clearly serving the public. We could disagree about that, but we can't disagree about whether or not that the content is objective and authoritative and based on the best available science, because it absolutely was. And so that just felt like a really, insult to injury kind of situation. So that's when we began to, as a team, talk about, what do we think their ultimate plan for Climate.gov is? What would the worst case scenario be? The worst case scenario is not what they did by just hiding our homepage or even taking Climate.gov completely offline. That was not the worst case scenario that we could imagine. We could imagine a scenario in which they actually used Climate.gov and the reputation that we had built over the past 15 years and the, 500,000 plus people that followed us on social media, that they could use our brand to spread misinformation about climate. And that is what really drove us to think, what could we do to keep that from happening? We thought, at minimum, we want there to be a version of Climate.gov that exists on the internet, easily accessible, not necessarily buried in an internet archive or the Wayback Machine, something that's there just like it was before, easy to find and use, a version of the site as it was when we were shut down, so that people would know that it was still trustworthy and that they could still trust that information. That's sort of our minimum hope for Climate.us. But if we're able to obtain funding to basically transition our whole operation to the nonprofit sector, then we want to continue the mission that we had, providing information, resources, and tools to the public to help them understand climate variability, natural climate variability, climate change, our choices for adapting, what our options are, what our risks are. We hope that we're going to be able to continue that mission.
It sounds like Climate.us was something that happened very on purpose. Instead of like you get an idea and they're like, oh, I'm going to do this cool idea, and then you just create a website. It sounds like this was way more strategic than that.
It was. Yeah, it was definitely more strategic. We, because as I say, anyone could make a copy of Climate.gov, and the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, and Web Recorder organizations, other groups have made copies of Climate.gov. But we said, this may be our once in a generation opportunity to build a platform for climate communication and engagement that is forever protected from political interference. This blatant attempt to censor the kind of information that the public has about climate. Maybe this will be the thing that, outrages people enough to say, we need to get this out from under the government and put it in a place and fund it so that this can never happen to it again. And so we went about, trying to bring the same strategy and rigor to making a pitch for a nonprofit successor that we brought to Climate.gov when we built it. So yes, it's a very deliberate, very strategized effort. That doesn't mean that it's like very well resourced. There's about 4 of us who over the summer worked on it close to full time, with contributions from maybe a half a dozen other people just contributing in their own time, little bits here and there. But we're doing the best we can with the resources we have.
Do you have any funding from anywhere or any hired help for the writers or anything, or is it just everyone volunteering?
Right now, it's purely volunteering. We did just recently hear that we might get a small fellowship for some of us to cover a little bit of salary for the next month or two while we are trying to really get this initiative off the ground, get it evaluated. So there will be a little bit of funding perhaps for that. But ultimately, probably it's going to need to be privately funded through philanthropies and foundations and a little bit of crowdsourcing, because we're serious about this. We're serious about what does it take to transition an operation like Climate.gov, publishing several articles a week, running 2 different blogs, all of the things that are involved. We have a global climate dashboard where we have, monthly updates of all kinds of climate indicators. It's a robust effort. It's a complicated project. And if we really want it to continue, it's going to take serious funding.
What kinds of information was on that site, and in what ways was it used to support taxpayers?
We had 3 primary sections of the site. There was the news and feature section, which we had, as I say, we wrote explainers and Q&As targeted to the science interested public, so non-experts, but people who are interested in trying to understand climate and climate change. We had a Q&A department where people wrote in and asked us questions about, which emits more carbon dioxide, volcanoes or humans, things like that, answers to questions like that. We had 2 blogs that were written by scientists that we provided editorial and graphic support for. One of them was about the natural climate phenomenon, the El Nino Southern Oscillation, or ENSO, which is the Earth's biggest, most influential natural climate pattern. We had a whole blog about that. We had a blog about the stratospheric polar vortex, which is a very hot topic in winter because there are fluctuations and variability in the polar vortex that can trickle down and influence the weather here at the service. And so we had bloggers writing about that. We had a whole section devoted to resources for educators and students. We had a collection, we hosted a collection called the Clean Collection, and it was classroom resources that had been vetted by a panel that had both scientists and teachers. So they could come together and evaluate suggestions that people had made for educational resources on climate, and the teachers would evaluate them and for their suitability for teaching a given standard and a given age group, and the scientists would vet them for accuracy and scientific correctness. So we were used by journalists. We would see our content, our images and maps and data visualizations would get used by the media. They would get picked up and used by professors writing textbooks. We had people contacting us who were in the insurance industry or farmers who would use the information that we provided there. We really had a diverse audience, but the largest portion of our audience, when we conducted user surveys, the largest portion of our audience was simply the general public who wanted to understand climate. And they were there because they wanted to know about extreme events and whether a particular extreme event that had happened in their area was connected or influenced by climate change. They wanted to know about how global warming was going to affect their neighborhood, their community. So mostly It was just Americans who wanted to try to understand climate.
That sounds like a lot of different people. So I wonder, do you have people reaching out to you at Climate.us saying, thank you so much for putting this website back. I used to check it every day. Has anyone got in touch with you and thanked you for putting this up again?
Yes, yes. In fact, when we released, when we made available the email address on our social media channels, within a day or two, first I was thought, okay, this is going to be manageable. I'm going to be able to respond to every one of these messages as they come in. Within 3 or 4 days, the number of messages that we had flowing into the inbox of people thanking us and volunteering their time and their skills to help us, teachers and, journalists and scientists, lots of people just writing in and saying they were so excited, and they thanked us and thought it was an important effort. So we have gotten a lot of positive feedback.
That's great. So are you planning to add more stuff to this website and like keep it maintained, or are you just backing up the old website?
That's completely dependent on funding. Sort of our minimum that we plan to do is to back up and make available a copy of Climate.gov. And we're going to bring back a web-based copy of the 5th National Climate Assessment. That's a whole other thing that we haven't talked about, what the current administration has attempted to do to the U.S. Global Change Research Program and the reports that it has put out over the past 30 years, 20 years, 25 years. 1990 is when the U.S. Global Change Research Program was created by Congress. And since then, they've put out a series of congressionally mandated reports where they essentially do for the United States what the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is doing for the global reports. They review all of the research that has been done since their last report that covers causes, impacts, risks associated with human-caused climate change in the United States. The IPCC reports, they're about what's going to happen to the Earth, the whole planet. But these reports from the USGCRP are focused on the United States. And they took all of those previous reports offline. We are hoping to, as I say, at minimum, we want to restore the most recent one, which is the 5th National Climate Assessment. We're going to bring that back as well. That is something that we're going to do probably regardless of whether we get any funding. It's something that we're just committed to and we're going to make happen. But if we are able to get funding, then yes, we're going to continue to write stories, keep those things updated. We have a whole section of the site that was the Global Climate Dashboard, where we had, annual and monthly, depending on the variable. We have simple graphics of sea level rise and the trends in sea level and carbon dioxide amounts in the atmosphere and the heat content of the global ocean. Those things are made to be updated. Sometimes some of them monthly, some of them yearly. We hope to be able to continue doing all those things.
So I also wanted to ask you, I didn't know this, but yesterday I learned that the Trump administration has released their own climate change report. Is there anyone left at NOAA working on climate issues? How did they publish this? Do you have any comments on it?
My comments on the report itself are that it's full of cherry-picked, biased, in some cases misinformation, in some cases half-truths. It's not in any way a true evidence-based, like scientifically based assessment. When the national climate assessments occur, they involve scores, possibly even more than 100 different scientists with different kinds of expertise who contribute. If you look at the previous national climate assessment reports, and you look at the chapter author list, it's 15 plus, 20 plus people long. It's lots of scientists bringing together all of that knowledge to try to tell the public, looking back over research that's been published in the last few years since the last report. What is the consensus of the evidence about some particular aspect of the impact of climate change on the United States? This report that came out from the DOE, there are I think maybe 5. It was all written by 5 people. Several of them I don't even think are climate scientists. So it is not a true climate scientifically credible report, unfortunately. And the evidence of that is that, in the last couple of days, in the last week, there have been several scientific organizations that have put out critiques of it, sort of page by page in some cases. They've done things like they made some claims about that global warming wasn't going to be that bad, for example, and they would use as a citation for that a paper that actually reached the completely opposite conclusion. So they've just picked out one sentence and taken it out of context and used it, in a biased fashion. It's not at all a true scientific assessment report. And the evidence of that is that there are several actual scientific organizations that are putting out critiques and rebuttals to it and saying this is not good science. But it's part of the administration's plan to use the stamp, the reputation of the federal government, to produce these biased reports that they can then use to justify doing something like rolling back what's called the endangerment finding. The EPA many years ago basically ruled that carbon dioxide and the influence of carbon dioxide, the fact that it's causing climate change, makes it a danger to the environment and public health. And therefore, it's something that they have to regulate per their congressional mandate. The strategy with these bogus reports is they're going to have the Department of Energy put out a supposedly scientific report saying climate change isn't going to be as bad as everybody's saying. The EPA then cites that report and says, well, now there's a federal report saying climate change is not going to be that bad. We're going to use that as a justification for repealing our finding that carbon dioxide is a threat to the environment or public health. So it's a sophisticated and, kind of sneaky way to try to get around the truth and the reality of human-caused climate change. Whether or not they will be successful with that, I couldn't say. If they try to repeal the endangerment finding, there will be a lawsuit about it. Someone will sue and force the courts to adjudicate whether this information that's in these reports is truly scientific or not.
None of the Supreme Court justices have, as far as I know, have any science background. So I personally am not excited about that idea. Is this related to the idea that the Trump administration recently, I'm not an expert in climate, but I heard that they said that greenhouse gases are actually not a danger. Is that the endangerment finding?
Yes, that's the endangerment finding. That finding from the EPA, I forget exactly what year when it occurred, but it was essentially a ruling. They were forced, I think, by a lawsuit to make a determination about whether carbon dioxide was harmful in the same way that other things that the EPA regulates were harmful, and therefore it should be considered something that they need to regulate. And they reached the conclusion that it was. That endangerment finding is what led to then all of the regulations about making cars and trucks get higher gas mileage, requiring power plants to significantly reduce their carbon dioxide emissions by using renewable energy or switching from coal to natural gas or those sorts of things. All of those regulations trickled down from the endangerment finding, the finding that carbon dioxide was a danger to the environment and to humans. And so, yes, they're trying to repeal that. And they're using that report from the DOE to justify it.
So I guess my last question for you is, I've talked to a lot of people that have been fired from the NIH and from the CDC. I want to say the first person I've talked to that is in the climate, environment, I guess weathery area. When I think about what's happening to data-driven policymaking about climate, I honestly feel very sad, and I do feel like my tax dollars are being wasted. What keeps you going during this time, and what do you see as a positive outcome after all of this clears, if it ever clears? Like, where do you see this Climate.us going?
Well, I think what keeps me going is I have always just been one of those people that I think that you have to work on the problems that are within your reach. You have so much going wrong in the government, especially in the science space. The decisions that are being made affecting the Centers for Disease Control. And here in West Virginia, they're about the same time I was getting fired. I was seeing news stories that all the staff at NIOSH, which is the National Institute for Occupational Safety Research, people who research black lung, which is a really big problem in West Virginia because we have such a coal mining dependent economy, that team got wiped out. So the threats and the suppression and the disregard for science of all kinds it's astonishing and alarming to those of us who believe that science, it doesn't have all the answers about what we should do, but science is what produces the information that we need to make decisions. And so it's really frightening to see an administration and a Congress going along with this complete abdication of support for science. And of course, one person can't do anything about that. Most of it is out of our control. But I'm a big believer in solve the problems that are under your control. And so this issue of Climate.gov being taken offline, being hidden, potentially at some point in the future, maybe being altered and changed in ways that degrade its integrity, that was something that was in my reach. And so it was something that I could do. And doing something concrete is one of the best ways, I think, to combat feeling hopeless. So I know this isn't something that's going to solve all problems. It's a small step, but it's concrete and it's something that we can do. And so that's why I keep going. That's why the team keeps going with the project. Now, as far as what might happen, what the future of it might be, this is a point of debate among our team. I do think the government will eventually come to its senses, not necessarily during this administration, but I do think that the government will eventually return to acknowledging the importance of science and scientific information, and acknowledging and valuing efforts like Climate.gov, where we are trying to be a bridge between scientists and the public to translate what the science means for people who are not science, focused. I do think that eventually efforts like Climate.gov may return. Parts of it may return to the government. But I think that the future for Climate.us is in providing those, being a partner to the government, a hypothetical government that will fund, scientific research and communication about that research. I think there will always be a way to split the effort and to say some things transcend all individual agencies. All agencies that are engaged in earth science or climate science need explainers about the greenhouse effect, things that aren't tied to a specific agency and its mission. I think that that will continue to have a home in the nonprofit sector, but then Climate.us could partner with federal agencies or state agencies or tribal governments to share the kind of content and information that is specific to their agency. So this sort of split between resources that are produced and published that are for anyone, that are sort of about basic climate literacy. We could continue to provide that, and the government could step back in and take on its responsibilities for talking about its unique science and its unique mission, the things that it's specifically doing to address national priorities and needs for climate information. That's the vision that I have.
Here's hoping that they look to that science. Is there anything else you wanted to add that we didn't talk about today?
I guess I would just say censoring information, hiding information it's never going to work. Hiding this information is not going to stop climate change from happening. People who deny the reality of climate change, they often accuse us of trying to tell people what to do. You know, what they resent about hearing about climate change and the role of carbon dioxide and methane and other greenhouse gases in causing global warming. They assume that we are trying to tell people what to do. We're not trying to tell people what to do. We're only trying to tell people what is likely to happen. What we do with that information, that depends on things beyond just the science. That depends on our values. What do we care about? What do we want to protect? How much suffering are we willing to tolerate for ourselves and our neighbors? When we share the kind of information about climate science that we share on Climate.gov, we're not trying to tell people what to do. We're only trying to provide the information that they need to decide what they want to do. People need to have information. They need to be informed. And that's all we're trying to do.
Good luck with Climate.us, and thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule of speaking to other major media outlets to speak with me today.
Thank you, Shiva. I appreciate the interest.